Okay, this is Chapter 9, Part 3. Part 3 will be short because I'm just going to talk about the neuromuscular junction, and then I'll do a Part 4 to finish up the notes. So the neuromuscular junction, you need to know a few terms. So the somatic motor neurons are going to be involved. So these are neurons, of course, that are going to stimulate the skeletal muscle fibers to contract. Each somatic motor neuron is going to have what we refer to as an axon. Okay, that axon, of course, is going to extend from the brain, of course, or the spinal cord to a group of skeletal muscles. So a skeletal muscle contracts due to one or more action potentials that move from axon to the muscle fiber. Muscle action potentials, of course, are going to arise from the neuromuscular junction area. So that's the synapse between a somatic motor neuron and a skeletal muscle fiber. A synapse, of course, is a region where the communication is going to occur between the neuron and a cell, or it can occur between two neurons. So you see a picture here. This is a picture of what they refer to as the neuromuscular junction. This is, of course, your muscle down here, and it's your myofibril, that thread-like structure, okay, of the muscle. And of course, the axon, and I'll go in here in just a few minutes on the details of what you're looking at on the axon, but this is the axon of that neuron. And of course, it's communicating. What we're going to talk about is this communication here between the axon terminal and the actual muscle or the myofibril, which is the muscle. So first, we're going to talk about a few definitions. Of course, at most synapses, what you're going to have is they refer to as a synaptic cleft. Okay, so if you look over here, the cleft is just this little space between the neuron and the muscle. So it's just that space. So it's just a small gap at most synapses. And what that space does, it separates the two cells. Okay. Next, you have, of course, a neurotransmitter. A neurotransmitter, of course, is a chemical that is going to be released into that synaptic cleft. So, and it does that because the cells do not physically touch. So what happens is the first cell needs to communicate with the second cell by releasing a chemical called a neurotransmitter. That neurotransmitter transmits or submits, of course, that information, of course, from the neuron to the target cell, which in this case would be the muscle. Okay. And then I tell you right here that the acetylcholine, of course, is the neurotransmitter, and its abbreviation is capital A, capital C, little h. That's abbreviations for acetylcholine. But acetylcholine is the most talked about neurotransmitter. Okay, so that is the neurotransmitter that's going to be released in the neuromuscular junction, and that's what NMJ stands for. So at the neuromuscular junction, the end of the motor neuron is called the axon terminal. That is going to divide into a cluster of synaptic end bulbs, which contain the synaptic vesicles. So if you look here, this is this whole piece here is just synaptic end bulb. Okay, it's going to contain your synaptic vesicles here. All these little vesicles with the dots in them, those are synaptic vesicles. What they do is it is a membrane enclosed sac and it contains the acetylcholine. Okay, so what we've done here, we've taken this little area and we've blown it up into this picture. Okay, so this next picture, of course, is representing, of course, that to show you that motor end plate. So that is the muscle fiber part of the neuromuscular junction. And you have acetylcholine receptors on that end. So what happens is the acetylcholine is going to bind specifically to the acetylcholine receptors. And the motor end plate is just showing it to you here. It's just showing you the muscle. Okay. Again, we've already talked about this area in the middle here. That's the cleft or the space. Okay. And this is a picture up here showing you, of course, the vesicle releasing the acetylcholine. Okay, first I'm going to show you, before I go over the process or the pathway of that neuromuscular junction, we'll talk about this is a histology slide showing you the nervous stimulation, of course, of the skeletal muscle. So again, this is your motor axon or the axon. Okay, it branches off here. Okay, at the end of the branches, you have those axon terminals, and then this area here where it's communicating, that's the neuromuscular junction. So it's and this over here is the muscle. Okay, so just to go through the pathway of a neuromuscular junction, and again, I will post a video on your Blackboard to show this in motion. Sometimes a lot of the pathways are easier to see, like in motion or where it's active. Okay, so if you look here at the first one, you have, of course, number one is the acetylcholine, of course, and you should know this pathway as well too. So number one is the acetylcholine is going to be released from the synaptic vesicle. So usually what I term this one is, for my shorthand, would be a release of acetylcholine. So again, just to review, the nerve impulse arrives at the synaptic end bulbs, causing many synaptic vesicles to release the acetylcholine into the synaptic cleft. So it goes into the synaptic cleft space. Then, of course, what happens next is they're going to have the activation of your acetylcholine receptors. So that's usually what I call the second one. So what happens is your acetylcholine binds to your acetylcholine receptor. What it does is it allows your sodium ions to flow inside of the muscle. So if you look at the picture here, of course, these little triangular pieces here or your acetylcholine, and you see it binding to this little purple thing here, which is your acetylcholine receptor. So it's going to enter into, of course, that along with the sodium ions. So what happens is you have binding of the acetylcholine to the receptor on the motor end plate, opens an ion channel. Then what it does, it allows that flow of your sodium ions to go inside of that muscle cell. Okay, so then we travel over here, and what happens is that the muscle action potential is going to be produced, and that's caused by those sodium ions that had entered in. Next, of course, it exits out. So the acetylcholine, you see it coming here in the picture, exits out, and when it exits out, the acetylcholine is going to be broken down by different enzymes. So just as a summary of that neuromuscular junction, I always like to give a little bit of a summary to summarize it all up. I think it sometimes makes it easier for students to go back and learn, of course, the pathway, or know basically what's happening. So acetylcholine, of course, is going to be released at the neuromuscular junction, okay, and that is going to, of course, trigger a muscle action potential. Okay, and then that muscle action potential is going to lead to the muscle contraction. Okay, so that is the end of course, the neuromuscular junction. And I'm going to talk about, go 2 more slides before I stop this recording. So botulinum toxin, that of course is produced by bacteria, and that bacteria's name is called Clostridium botulinum. What that does is it blocks the release of acetylcholine from that synaptic vesicles. It may be found, of course, in improperly canned foods. So if it's found in foods, even a tiny amount can cause death by paralyzing the respiratory muscles. Okay. So it can be dangerous. Botulinum toxin also can be used as medicine, and when it's used as medicine, they call it Botox. It's used to help to correct crossed eyes, and that crossed eye term is called strabismus. It's also used to correct someone when they have uncontrollable blinking, which is called Blenfar spasms. Spasms of the vocal cords, of course, they interfere with speech. They also use Botox for cosmetic treatment to relax muscles that cause your facial wrinkles. And Botox is also used to elevate chronic back pain due to, of course, muscle spasms, of course, in the lumbar region. Uh, Checkpoint questions again, try to answer them on your own first, then I'll go over the answers. So number one is blank is a test that measures the electrical activity of your muscle action potentials in resting and contracting muscles. So your choices are your EKG, electrocardiogram, B, EMG, which is your electromyography, and your C, acetylcholine. So the answer to this one, of course, is your EMG, your electromyography. Number two, the neurotransmitter that we talked about, again, is your acetylcholine. That's the neurotransmitter that's involved in the stimulation, of course, of those skeletal muscle cells. So this is the end of part 3.